This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have #1 internationally best-selling author Darby Kane here to talk about her new release, What the Wife Knew. Welcome, Darby.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining me. Before we get into this magnificently plotted story, can you start us off with an overview of what it's about?
Sure. It's about a woman who blackmails a famous national hero into marriage. He deserves it. Don't worry about it. And she does it with the intention of ruining him, but someone kills him before she can do that. But she's not about to let that stop her. She's still going to ruin him. The problem is now she's been tagged as the person who killed him. So she's got to clear her name and do what she initially started to do in the first place.
And those two plots, the will she or won't she get arrested? Will she or won't she be seen as the person who's done this? And will she or won't she really get what she's looking for in the end? Those two plots, the way that you ran them, you just took my breath away. It was just constant questions and in constant movement. And I guess we need to start right off with it. Addison is amazing. Your protagonist, she's been through some things, right?
Yeah, she has seen some things. She is absolutely my favorite character that I've written so far. And I think part of it is this is the first book I ever wrote in first person. So I'm as close to being in her messed up little head as possible. And I love her. I love her because she's like a survivor and she's just trying to figure out how to get through to the other side in a very extreme situation. But yeah, I just love her. And she's sarcastic. So getting to play with kind of what's in her head and what she's thinking, kind of some of the stuff we all think sometimes that we know we shouldn't say. She thinks it and sometimes she says it.
Well, I wanted to just point that out. I loved that repartee, especially between her and a character that she kind of isn't sure where she stands, which is her attorney. The banter between them is so rapid fire. It reminds me of the dialogue from the amazing noir,
Nice.
of Hollywood's golden era. I mean, it is so fast and it is so quick. And there were so many times where I was just like, oh, I've got to reread that. What did she just say? Wait, okay, that was awesome.
That's fantastic. She's somebody who just doesn't really trust anyone for good reason. I mean, she's been through it. So when someone steps into her life, this attorney, she's not 100% sure. Like, he says he's on my side, but I've never found an attorney to be on my side. I am one, so that's where that came from. So I enjoyed kind of giving her someone who I think the readers know fairly quickly how they feel about him, but she's not sure. And that was kind of fun to play with.
Part of Addison, when we say she's been through it, part of what she's been through is where she's coming from and what her family dynamic was. And then there's this new family that she's inserted herself into. There's a lot of different, very powerful themes that you play on, realities that we can all relate to in our normal lives, being part of families. And one of the biggest ones that I wanted to ask you about was, and I understand your background, you were a divorce attorney, right?
I was, yeah.
Makes me want to ask this question even more. There is that point where a couple starts out and they're so in love with each other and they're so intent on coming together and walking this path together. But then sometimes with marriage and children, those paths diverge. Yes. And the interest of serving the group, whether it's the children, the spouse, becomes more about serving themselves. And I'm sure you saw that play out over and over again, sadly. But you pulled those threads through this story very well about people who are in family dynamics but are really in it for themselves. Was that just because of your career and your experience, or was that just kind of themes you've seen just in your own life with friends and other family members?
I mean, I think we all see it, right? Like around us, even if it's not in our own, if we're lucky enough for it not to be in our own family, we see it around us. But as a divorce attorney, as you would imagine, you see people not at their best, right? Like, going in, you say to yourself, I am sure outside of this context, I hope these people are different from what I'm seeing. I don't know. But and what 12 years of doing that kind of work, what I really learned was how much kind of like unresolved trauma and family dysfunction that people deal with on different levels. I mean, this book, there's some extreme levels, of course, but just just getting through the day and gaslighting and all of those sort of things that you kind of, and when you live in it, I think it just becomes like not okay, but a reality that it's an expectation is going to happen, and none of us should have to expect that kind of thing. When I wrote the book and I wrote Addison, I really did want to look at like really deep family dysfunction, and not just kind of how she grew up and what she married into. And and it's not, a lot of times that manifests in books as like physical abuse or so, and that's not what is happening in this book. It's a very different kind of expectations and kind of the pressure that's put on you to do things that are not great and will derail your entire life, but you do it because you're kind of like desperate for that love. I think in a lot of ways Addison is desperate for, she would never admit this, but desperate for unconditional love. She hasn't known it. She doesn't know what it means. She's kind of internally searching for it. And when it comes near her, she actually doesn't even recognize it, which I think is actually unfortunately relatable.
But that trauma from kind of the emotional violence of not having those safe places to live in. When you think of a child never feeling safe, emotionally safe where they are, and what that creates then in an adult. Motives were very interesting. I kept questioning who's what is this person's actual motive? They're presenting this way, but is there something deeper? And you, oh my goodness, you hid so many secrets. You were absolutely amazing. Was that hard to put together, the plot of it and the structure? Because, oh my gosh, that spider web was huge.
It was, before I started actually writing even a page of this book, I have a whiteboard. I'm not sitting in my office right now because the book I'm writing is on the whiteboard behind me, and I couldn't figure out how to like block that. But I start with a whiteboard, and for What the Wife Knew, I actually started with a kind of what Addison knows, what the reader knows, what I know, and kept looking at it thinking, how am I going to have these weave together? And I wanted there to be points where the readers knew things that Addison actually did not yet know, because that's the fun to me. Like, I love building on secrets, right? And you think about what do my characters know that they're not saying, but the idea that the readers are kind of in on some of it, or at least in some ways, like maybe a step ahead of where the character is because they know a little bit more. I just think that is really powerful. As a reader, that is the kind of thing that just kind of sucks me into the book, and I can't put it down. Like, I just have to read it until it's done, and then I'm breathless and ready to relax.
One of the things that kind of kept me breathless again was Addison just trying to navigate her daily life.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's a huge pressure point, again, extended family, new family. There's some characters that aren't that far in age from her. Yeah. One of them in particular is, I think he's only 7 years behind her.
Yeah.
And I found it so incredibly powerful how you wrote Addison's mindset, where she really thinks of him, and she refers to him as a kid multiple times, even though he's only 7 years behind. And you can look at that in certain ways, because it is true. Certain times of our lives in human development, there's huge gaps, right?
Yeah,
From 7 to
definitely.
14 is epic, right? And
Yes.
you can make
Yes.
some points about, you know, she's 27, and so someone who's 20 is still starting out, and she's kind of got her foot in the door of her life.
Right.
But still, to call him a kid, that was incredibly powerful. What informed that for you to really create her that way? So she is kind of a fish out of water, even in her own kind of demographic.
Yeah, it was important to me. I mean, if you think about what I said, a woman who like blackmails a national hero into marriage, I, it was important to me. There's a reason she does all of this. And I wanted her, she didn't necessarily have to be likable. I love her. She didn't necessarily have to be likable, but I wanted her to have, despite everything, a sense of empathy, even though she fights it and she doesn't like it because she knows it's not helping her at all. But when she blackmails this man into marriage, he's already married. Like, he has a wife and he has these two kids, Wyatt and Portia. And so when she goes out to ruin Richmond, her then husband, her now husband, before he dies, it takes her a while to realize that what she does is she's actually derailed all of their lives. Like he was the one who deserved it. All of them are paying a price. And I wanted her to recognize that, and she recognizes it fairly early. Well, it's happening early, but she doesn't fully recognize kind of what she's saying and doing for these kids. But I thought that was important because she's not awful. She's not heartless. There's a reason all of these things are happening. So yeah, that's kind of how, but I do think in her head, in order to kind of justify some of the stuff that happens in this dysfunctional family she ends up marrying into, is she almost has to think of him as a kid, right? Like if she thinks of him as a grown-up with grown-up responsibilities and having to take responsibility for his actions like she thinks she needs to, he's not hitting the bar very well, right? But if she calls him a kid, she can kind of like just separate herself a bit and separate them from their actions.
Going back to this kind of family dynamic she finds herself in, her marriage is very unconventional.
Yeah,
And
I mean, hate each other. You can say that.
I feel like all of your past clients who've gone through divorces should read this book and be like, wow, it really wasn't that bad.
It was fine. It was fine.
Absolutely good. The way you set them up, what you reveal to us about their relationship being Richmond and Addison's, and what it's like to be in that house, that just hit me out of nowhere because I didn't necessarily know where that was going. And you structured that so well. My gosh, you just swung for the fences and hit every time. I mean, it was really great.
Sometimes when you're writing, you say, especially this kind of book with who Richmond is and who Addison is and why they're together. I mean, from the very first scene, which is his funeral, he's dead. It's his funeral and she's there and it's in her head and she is not even a little sad. Right. In fact, the whole thing is just annoying her. She'd rather be at home. So you kind of get this view of them a certain way. And the reality is they hate each other and they don't want to be married, and they're married because of this thing and this blackmail. And being able, I kind of said to myself, you either going to have to go for it or not do it at all. Right. Like this isn't one where you could kind of like water it down a little bit, make it not as, no, you either had to go for it or not go for it. And I just decided to go for it on this one. Yeah. So it does. I fully admit there are pieces of this book that feel unhinged. And, but if you think about it, like how often do we see, like real life stuff and you read it and you're like, no, if I put that in my book, my editor would be like, absolutely not. No, we're not that. Nobody's going to buy that, because sometimes what does happen is so bizarre. And so how is that possible that when you're writing, you're kind of trying to hit I want this to be interesting and I want it to be a certain way. And like, when do I hit too much? Like, where is the line? And this one, I just decided there wasn't a line. I was going to go for it. If my editor pulled me back, then she could pull me back, but I was going to do what I wanted to do going in.
Well, I think the reason that you were so successful is the plausibility. Each one of these characters, their motives, their behavior, you shored all of it up. There's no question of, you might say, oh my gosh, well, that's extreme. Well, yeah. Look at their perspective. Of course, it's going to be extreme. Extremes are something that interest me as well. And you referenced earlier that Richmond has been hailed as a hero in the past. And because of that, his life has turned out a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
What is it, do you think, about heroes that causes people in mass numbers to look at them and elevate them and maybe not see the entire person, just see one incident?
Yeah. I think some of it is dependent on the person, right? Like, there are people who, when they get whatever kind of spotlight they get, the answer is that becomes all they are, right? Like they don't have to be anything else or be bigger or feel bigger or anything like that. It's like that becomes their entire personality. And when that happens, if somebody chips away at that, or if people are no longer that interested in that spotlight, what do you have left? Right? Like, you're kind of an empty shell. And then there are people who are heroes and don't want to be called heroes, don't think of themselves that way. They just did whatever they did. And those folks seem to be okay, because even if we decide as the public we want to knock them off the pedestal, they're like, I don't care. The pedestal is not everything I am. Richmond, the pedestal was a big pedestal, right? Like, and he built his entire life around being a hero, which, I don't know, maybe that's human nature. Is it human nature? Maybe it would be human nature. Like, you kind of like, what is it called? Reading your own press. Like you start thinking, well, if everybody else thinks I'm great, I must be pretty great. So playing with a person like that versus somebody like Addison, who's very kind of practical and frankly just trying to survive, they were so different to kind of bring them together in a way where it's not a love match. There's nothing romantic about this book. They absolutely do not like each other. And that hopefully is clear from the very first scene. But the why and how deep and how bad it is kind of what I hope unravels while you read the book.
One other thing that I noticed and absolutely adored was we have female characters presented in this book who range in age, I believe, from 15 all the way up to, I want to say, mid 40s.
Yeah.
In there.
In their late 40s, yeah.
And every one of them is extremely strong in their own way. And I loved that, because sometimes people look at women and they look at us as a monolith and think, oh, well, a strong woman looks like X or a strong woman looks like Y. And you gave us a broad range of very strong women. Was that, again, just part of your life, seeing the beauty of the spectrum, so to speak, of women?
I think so. And it's also, to be honest, in some ways, it's why I write thrillers, right? For years, under a different name, under Helen K. Diamond, I wrote romance and romantic suspense. And then I wrote my first thriller. It's called Pretty Little Wife. Also not a romance. And when I wrote it, it was like I was angry. There had been like a series of cases where, her name's like Chantal or Chanel, where she's like attacked, and the guy who attacks her gets, I don't know, 8 months in prison. And the father is like, yes, but if he's in prison, he won't be able to eat steak, and he likes steak. And I'm like, what is happening right now? And so I think it was kind of this combination of like anger and trying to put it somewhere. And also this idea that like women are nicer. Women are like, this is just nonsense, right? Women are women, and some are nice and some are not so nice, and some can be evil, and some we're very three-dimensional. And the idea that I had been reading so many incredible thrillers by women, female thriller writers. It starts with Gone Girl, but the whole breadth of these women writing these amazing kind of female-centric thrillers where they were allowed to do bad things and they were allowed to make bad decisions and they were allowed to do all of those things. And I thought it was just so eye-opening and refreshing that it wasn't like the woman had to be the victim or the sidekick or the whomever. She was it. And if she decided to do something bad, like kill her husband or ruin her husband, there was a reason for it. And I could play with that. And that's kind of why I write thrillers. I try to write all of them from the perspective of, here's a three-dimensional woman who is flawed and hopefully in some ways relatable, and hopefully in some ways are like, why did she do that? And let them do what I think is authentic to what that character would do. And I've had great fun. And I still read, you can probably tell from the shelves behind me, I read books written by these amazing women thriller writers who are just writing these books that I remember the first time I read Jennifer Hillier, it was The Butcher maybe. And I read it and I was like, it was kind of like I didn't even know you could do this. Good job, Jennifer. This is incredible. So yeah, I just love everything about that. And I love, sometimes women are the sidekicks and the secretaries and the victims, but they don't always have to be. And I think we can write books that show it's a much bigger world than that.
I know you love writing that. We love reading your work. For your existing fans and for the new fans who are going to find you, what is the best place, Darby, for them to reach out, see what you've got going, what's coming down the line?
Probably my website, which is darbykane.com. And from there, you can find links to Facebook and Instagram and, BookBub. I actually read a lot, and the books that I like, I will put up on BookBub, hoping that somebody else will see it and be like, hey, I'll try that. Her book's okay. Maybe I'll go try this one that she read. So you'll be able to find links. You'll be able to find books that are coming out, excerpts, all of that. If you want to just read that first chapter of What the Wife Knew and that very happy funeral scene, you can do that on the website.
Perfect. Well, all I can say is now that I know what the wife knew, I am absolutely in love. So thank you, Darby. Thank you for writing such a wonderful story. And thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.